We've programmed a minefield of cutting-edge weaponry to safeguard our borders.
Run.
We are talking The Devil's Triangle. This is a 2021 Asylum movie that stars Fred Williamson. Now, the Asylum is primarily known for its mockbusters. In case you don't know what a mockbuster is, it's essentially a cheap kind of knockoff movie designed to cash in on the name of a much bigger blockbuster movie. For example, you'll have Transformers, so you'll get Transmorphers, things like this. And they tend to kind of come out when we have a larger, big budget films, and you'll get kind of a cheap straight-to-video Asylum movie which is meant to kind of cash in on the name. However, the Asylum do occasionally do some original movies, and in actual fact, the Asylum movies that I've watched is actually the original movies that I've seen of theirs are the ones that I've actually enjoyed a little bit more than their kind of straight kind of mockbusters. No, I haven't seen every Asylum movie, so I can't say that's the case every time, but it tends to be, and maybe it's because the filmmakers have a little bit more kind of creativity and freedom to kind of do what they want. And I have to say that I did, to a point, enjoy this movie. Now this, although not strictly a mockbuster, it's strikingly similar to the 70s movie Warlords from Atlantis. Or kind of, you could say more generally, it's inspired by kind of like a Jules Verne kind of maybe aesthetic. Now you might be thinking initially it might be an Aquaman kind of mockbuster, but no, Warlords from Atlantis is the kind of the nearest movie I would say that this one comes close to. Okay, now Asylum movies are always going to be cheap. Let's just get that out of the way. So if you're not a fan of cheap B movies, then this isn't going to be the movie for you. But let me just tell you about the plot. What actually happens? So it focuses on the crew and passengers of a commercial airliner that essentially crashes in the ocean near the Bermuda Triangle. And we have a small group of survivors that wash up onshore of this seemingly deserted island initially. However, they are soon captured by a group of Atlanteans, of whom this island is actually kind of one of their outposts, taken undersea to the kingdom of Atlantis, where they meet the king, and Atlantis is guarded by a giant Hydra-like creature. Now, what is the Atlanteans' intentions? Is it kind of friendly? Is it kind of more hostile? You have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about what I liked first of all about this movie. So, as I mentioned, I do feel, at least in my opinion, the ones I've seen, the films that tend to be more original, I've enjoyed a little bit more. And I did actually enjoy this one quite a lot, at least initially. So, the first act, I have to say, is actually quite strong. The introductions to the passengers, the downing of the flight. Then we have, once the plane is in the water, we actually get some quite kind of vicious shark attacks. Gathering up the survivors on the beach, and then that first meeting with the Atlanteans. Again, for a B movie standard, I actually thought it was quite strong. It was well paced. It was kind of like fairly kind of well shot. I thought the character introductions were adequate, so you could have got a flavour for the characters and things like that. And then even when we get our shark attacks, and sharks aren't really a big part of this movie, but initially we get a couple. And I got to say, I thought they were kind of quite strong, kind of quite brutal. What else can I say? I actually think the two actors who played our real main protagonists, these two kind of marine biologists, are actually fairly strong. I actually kind of believe them in their roles. Again, for a kind of a low budget Asylum picture, I thought they were, quite engaging as lead kind of characters, and gave a reasonable performance, and I kind of, somewhat kind of believe them in their role. Fred Williamson also always kind of fun to watch. Obviously a well respected kind of cult movie actor at this kind of point in his career. What else could I say? I do appreciate some of the attention to detail here. Now, some of this is just going to be to explain away some kind of obvious plot holes, but I appreciated the attempt. So what do I mean? So, for example, when we get to Atlantis, there's a comment on, oh, how are you speaking English? Shouldn't you be speaking some kind of ancient language? And they explain it by saying, well, we've had mainlanders here before, so we've kind of learned the language, and we get things like, you know, how they illuminate the place, the power source, things like this. There's lines of dialogue, how they, you know, scour weapons and things from mainlanders. So there's a kind of a few things here that, yes, they're just kind of like lines of dialogue to explain away budgetary constraints and things like that. But I appreciate the attempt to at least have them there. You know, often you'll find something that you in a movie where you needed a line of dialogue to kind of like make sense of something. And even though, yeah, it's just a way of not having to kind of deal with the complex issues of the realities of what would actually happen, I at least appreciate the attempt. They could have just not done it, you know. And it's like, you know, no one questions why in Star Wars everyone's speaking English, for example. So I at least appreciate the attempt there to kind of have that. There are some shots here. Now, the CGI is quite cheap, but there are some shots here that I do feel actually look pretty impressive. There's some kind of wide-angle shots where we kind of like see the kind of the Atlantis and its kind of like, you know, glory and stuff. I thought looked quite good. I actually kind of quite like the Hydra at times in the movie as well. I thought that was kind of quite fun. And I feel this movie does have a little bit of nuance with some of the characters, at least. For example, when we get our group of survivors in Atlantis, you know, you're kind of wondering what the kind of the state of players of all the kind of characters, because, you know, our survivors are obviously quite scared, but they kind of want to kind of play along and to kind of play it safe rather than just kind of being like, you know, completely obnoxious or stuff. So there is some kind of like attempted to have a little bit of kind of like cleverness from our sort of characters, and even the Atlanteans as well. You know, are they kind of being sincere, or are they kind of hiding their intentions? So at least, you know, again, it's not completely basic in regards to some of the kind of the nuances in regards to the kind of the characters and things like that. Okay, let's maybe transition to now what I don't think works. Now again, this is an asylum picture, so the obvious thing here is going to be the low budget. And yes, it's a very low budget movie, as are pretty much all asylum movies. But I feel if you're going to go and watch an asylum movie, you kind of have to expect that. So, you know, yes, there's lots of kind of low budget stuff here. And I'm forgiving off some of the stuff. The CGI, as I've mentioned, isn't particularly good. I'm not too worried about it. You know, if I'm watching an asylum movie, I'm not expecting massively kind of high grade kind of CGI there. But, you know, so I personally can forgive that. But just to let you know that obviously the CGI in places is a little mixed. Let me just say that. The thing I feel was the most distracting of this movie was the use of kind of props for our Atlanteans. Because obviously, and again, this comes down to a budgetary issue, and I'm fairly forgiving of stuff. But the issue for me is that these Atlanteans are wearing like motocross kind of armour. You know, they're just kind of like in standards kind of, you know, mainstream kind of like buildings and things like this. Yes, it's a budgetary issue, I appreciate that, but I feel that like more could have been done to try and make it a little bit more maybe ancient looking or alien looking, because it kind of just looks like, you know, a set or even just someone's, you know, an office block where they're filming and things like this. So again, this is the problem when making a very kind of like fantastical movie by such a kind of obviously a low budget film. The budget constraints here are really bad, and obviously it really doesn't. The Atlanteans just look like people going to a, you know, Comic-Con and things like this. The kind of the armor and the face paint. Again, it's just very kind of like cheesy and kind of silly. Silly to the point where I think it's noticeable. Now, I've mentioned I really enjoyed the first act, and I do. The second two acts, however, are a little different. The second act the movie really slows down, and one of the critiques I often have of asylum movies is that I often say there's lots of conversations in rooms. So to pad out the running time, so it's not all effects and kind of set pieces and expensive kind of shots and things like this. The movies will be kind of stretched out by having, you know, characters just having a conversation in a room, fairly, cheap to kind of do, just pads up the running time. And that is the case of this, as it is with a lot of other cheap movies, not even just asylum movies, but low budget movies. The good pacing in the first act, we lose it in the second act because you don't really get much plot progression. And then the third act is kind of when we have our our action kind of finale. Is never as strong as the kind of the first act. So you don't leave it on a high. The action, kind of the shootouts, everyone's just seems like they're running around on a kind of a very kind of small set, and the kind of the action, it feels very confined. I think it would have been better to maybe have it back on the island to give it a little bit more kind of a space. It just feels like, this city of Atlantis is about 2 or 3 corridors, and that's kind of it. And it looks kind of just very kind of low tech. Now, these movies are kind of made very quickly and stuff like that, with probably very few takes. So again, you have to kind of you have to give it kind of some level of expectation when you kind of watch these things. And there are some interesting things. I still kind of quite like the Hydra in this movie, despite the fact that it seems to come out of 5 feet of water at one point. But there you go. Some of the Atlanteans themselves kind of, I feel like they're somewhat inspired by the kind of the characters from Thor, from Asgard, because they kind of speak in some kind of old English kind of style, Shakespearean almost ways of speaking. And again, it's a little bit kind of silly. They don't seem particularly threatening. I did sort of like, there's some scenes here that I kind of quite liked where our kind of marine biologists are actually quite excited to learn about all this kind of new science. And I actually thought that they actually kind of connect with one of the Atlanteans on a kind of a scientific level. And I feel that was a missed opportunity to have maybe some of the Atlanteans be a bit more varied in their kind of train of thought. All the Atlanteans tend to have very much a one goal. You don't really get much difference in kind of personalities. There's the science kind of woman who is from the Atlanteans. I thought it's a missed opportunity to make her a bit more kind of sympathetic and kind of be a bit more interested in kind of learning about the kind of the mainlanders and things like that, and maybe connect with her a little bit more. But it gets really silly because again, for plot convenience, we have our scientists literally point out the kind of the shortcomings in the Atlanteans' technology, and how to basically defeat them and things like this. So it's just again, the kind of the quickness of making these kind of style films makes it for a little bit of a silly kind of moments here and there. So overall, I've got to say, I still had quite a lot of fun. I thought our central 2 characters were fun. The opening was strong, which made me at least invested in kind of the movie kind of going forward. I was kind of quite enjoying the kind of the ride. And although I feel it does kind of taper off, overall, I still feel this was quite a fun romp. It's extremely dumb. There's no kind of getting around it. Budgetary restraints are obviously a big thing here. But I feel if you enjoy B movies and you can kind of be a bit forgiving about some of the kind of obvious budgetary and kind of time constraints that they've had here, I still feel there's actually a reasonable amount to kind of enjoy for a kind of a dumb but fun movie. So I'll give this one a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.